All right, so picking up in the second part of our lecture, and I'm sorry that I have to do it this way, but the software that I'm using to record my lectures only allows me to take 15-minute snippets at a time. So picking up where we left off, just want to continue to kind of expand on what is due process. Due process, as I said, is the first part of the 14th Amendment, where it's basically saying that states have to or cannot deprive you of your protections by law. So that's due process. That basically, for you to have your life, liberty, or pursuit of happiness kind of impeded, whether to be thrown in jail, to be sued, etc., they have to follow the law. In this case, federal law. And so Gitlow, even though it again denied Gitlow his freedom of speech, it partially reversed the Barron v. Baltimore decision in the opinion when it said essentially, here's the pathway to the application of the First Amendment at the state level. So, as I said at the end of part one, this started kind of that continuing trend to slowly but surely applying each of the 10 amendments, each of the Bill of Rights pieces at the state level, and that's incorporation. So the incorporation doctrine was started in Gitlow, where they used the 14th Amendment to apply the Bill of Rights to the state governments. And I want to be very clear here because that's the question that would be asked you. What amendment what started the whole incorporation or selective incorporation movement? It was the 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment guarantees equal protection under the law and due process of law. And so starting at Gitlow, basically since that 1919 piece in Gitlow v. New York, over the last 100 years, there has been case after case after case that has extended the Bill of Rights to the state governments. Because again, Congress shall make no law. What about the states? So now we're going to kind of begin kind of a deeper dive into the amendments themselves and look at these civil liberties individually. And so we're going to start where it makes sense to start, which is at the First Amendment. And the question that we're answering here is, what religious liberties does the First Amendment guarantee? And so, we can all kind of sort of close our eyes here and make a list and say, oh, well, that's speech, that's assembly, that's freedom of press, oh, and religion. And those are all in the First Amendment. So the First Amendment is incredibly rich and important. And specifically, let's start by looking at what it says about religion, right? And so if you read the First Amendment like very closely, you see that it actually says two things about the federal government's limitations on restricting practice of religion and then like basically sanctioning an official religion. And so each of these two pieces dealing with religion in the First Amendment are seen as separate clauses from a constitutional law perspective. The first clause found in the First Amendment dealing with a religion is known as the Establishment Clause. And the Establishment Clause is extremely important. And essentially what it says, and not essentially, what it says is that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. So plain and simply, the federal government can't make a law that establishes any preference of any particular religion or even preferencing religion versus non-religion. So a lot of people think, oh, well, the federal government can't say we're a Catholic nation because the Baptists would be screwed, right? But really, what if you look at it is pretty simply here. What's actually saying is make no law respecting an establishment of religion. So that also, by extension here is implied religion versus non-religion as well. Now, to be very clear, that doesn't require total separation of the church and state. And so the courts have kind of clarified to what extent can the federal government kind of deal with religion or involve itself religion. And so there are limits that have pushed it back. And then there are some cases that have said, no, that's okay. And so essentially, the Establishment Clause mandates the accommodation of all religions equally and forbids hostility towards any, whether that's Islam or Judaism or atheism, right? You can't be hostile to non-religious people under the literal reading of the Establishment Clause either. It forbids any government endorsement, right? So the government can't, say, hey, we are a Christian nation. It's popularly said on Fox News and other places. But at the end of the day, the Establishment Clause makes pretty clear that while the founding fathers themselves may have been Christian, they specifically included the First Amendment Establishment Clause to say we are, and we might culturally be very Christian, but the government themselves cannot endorse Christianity versus any other religion, or, religion versus no religion. Now, when you think about all the places this could get tricky, and imagine the thousands of cases that have been tried in courts seeking to define the limits of what the Establishment Clause means, probably the most obvious place that comes to mind would be government funding of religious schools. Now, I'm not saying government funding of like St. Mary's Catholic School in Colorado Springs, but what about when the government gives Pell Grant money to Notre Dame University? Notre Dame's a Catholic school. Pell Grants money so poor kids can go to college at cheaper costs. That's federal money. Can the government dispense, right, federal tax dollars to a religious university like Notre Dame or Georgetown or any of the other Catholic universities in this country? And so obviously they can, but if you were to look at that, you would see that like the Establishment Clause makes it seem, at least on the surface, like maybe they can't. And so basically courts have clarified that they can give money to religious schools, but it can only be used for specific things, right? They can give money to a federal school so it can build a new gymnasium that will then be usable by the community. In addition to the school itself, they can give money to poor kids to go to college. They can give money so that the a university can upgrade its water system. Um, but essentially, for the government to give money to a religious school, they must, basically, the religious school is then agreeing that they have to allow non-religious groups to use their facility as well. So if they truly want to be private and say nobody outside of university students can ever use this campus or use this school, we will never do anything related to the community at large, it is simply for used for religious purposes, then they can't give money to that school. And so, if you're giving money to a school, the colleges must fund non-religious groups equal to religious groups. So, Georgetown University probably has an atheist students group, and they have to allow that and fund that equally to the Fellowship of Christian Athletes. That's how they stay in bounds of the Establishment Clause and still get money from the federal government. Now, the threshold for constitutionality, and again, this is where courts say you've gone far enough, move back. The threshold for constitutionality is greater when that university or that public high school or private high school attempts to use funds for directly religious reasons or directly religious purposes, or in this case, religious education. So if the government said, okay, we're going to give you a grant so that you can hire a college and career counselor, St. Mary's Catholic school, that would be fine. But they couldn't then turn around and use that grant money to hire a religion teacher. That would be out of bounds of the Establishment Clause because the federal government would be giving money directly to a religious organization to establish part of their religion. One of the must-know cases that deals with the Establishment Clause and kind of in the area of what I'm talking about is Engel v. Vitale. And this was the case where kids in the state of New York were forced to begin each day, in addition to saying the Pledge of Allegiance, with prayer. towards God. And so Anglo Vitale was the case that basically said, you've gone far enough, right? You are a public school receiving public tax dollars. You cannot force students to pray to begin their day. And so Anglo Vitale said there is a limit. There can be no prayer as part of classes in a public school, because public schools take public tax dollars, and the Establishment Clause says no. Now, how have they gotten around that? Some schools in, Texas or Oklahoma or rural parts of America will basically include moments of silence where they say students are free to pray or not pray in that time. You can meditate, and that has been said, yes, that's okay. But you can't say, hey, here's 10 minutes, we're all going to pray. Um, Again, Alabama does the loophole with the moment of silence. Let's move on. And so this has also been used. The Establishment Clause has also been used by courts to basically rule that teaching intelligent design in a public school setting is unconstitutional. Intelligent design is basically that God created the world 2,500 years ago, and that dinosaurs are a myth, and that we all began from Adam and Eve just a very short time ago, and that evolution is nonsense. Basically, lots of states have tried it, and it's always been stopped by the courts as unconstitutional under the Establishment Clause, because that is an overtly religious teaching in Christian ideology. What about if they post 10 commandments outside of government buildings, like a courthouse? This has been in the news in the last decade. Alabama has always wanted to post and was posting the 10 commandments, that foundational early piece of law, outside of government buildings. No murder, and there's no God but God, and all the 10 commandments given to Noah, they had been posted. Is that allowable under the Establishment Clause? A court is clearly a government building. Can they post it? And basically, the government has said that it's allowable only if you also allow other groups, non-religious groups, etc., to also post their religious things. And so if you give everyone equal access, including from atheists to satanic cults, then posting the 10 commandments is okay. But if you are not allowing them to post theirs as well, then you must take your 10 commandments down. And so basically, some parts of Alabama have said, fine, we will allow other groups to post theirs. And we have a series of muckrakers in this country, people that like to kind of stir up and push on these things. And this is the Satanic Church, which I am unclear whether they're actually devil worshippers or whether they're just a group that likes to push back on the Establishment Clause. Because shortly after this ruling came out, you basically had the Satanic Church of America come forth and say, we want to post a statue of our satanic, god Chutulu, or whatever his name is, outside of the courthouse. And when the courthouse said, no, we cannot allow that, then basically they had to agree to take down the 10 Commandments too, because the Establishment Clause says you can make no law giving any favor to any one religion over another religion, or religion over non-religion. But if you allow everybody equal access and allow everyone to do it, then that has been the constitutional loophole. Then some of you might be thinking about, what about nativity scenes in public buildings? Can public schools include that nativity scene with little baby Jesus in the manger, right? Or outside of government buildings like city halls? And the court has basically ruled that Christmas swag in these nativity scenes is allowable, because essentially Christmas rather has sort of become a cultural holiday in addition to a religious holiday, and so it serves a secular purpose too, and so the courts have said that's okay. Looking here is a whole series of fun things to look at. Rather than take up time in this lecture, I am going to just allow you to kind of stare at this for a second. We're at the end of our second 15 minutes, and so I'm going to call part 2 of the lecture here. I will post part 3 and 4 sometime tomorrow. Have a good day, everyone.